There we go. Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming to the webinar all about safety planning, where we will learn all about safety planning. Again, my name is Mary Beth Becker-Loth. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the domestic violence community educator at Women's Advocates. What is Women's Advocates, you say? Well, if you are here for the first time at one of our webinars, Women's Advocates is a nonprofit organization in St. Paul, Minnesota. We offer a continuum of safety through our prevention programming, like these webinars, our emergency shelter and advocacy services, and our aftercare housing stability services for victim survivors of domestic violence. We began in the early 1970s as a legal advice helpline for women seeking divorce. And by 1974, we had purchased our very first safe home to shelter abused women and children. And in the almost 50 years since, we've expanded, and our shelter is now 3 connected homes. So that's who we are. And in the next 90 minutes, here's what we're going to cover. I'm going to launch a poll real quick to figure out where you're coming from. What's your role in the domestic violence prevention community? And while you answer that, I'll tell you where we're headed today. So this presentation has 4 parts. The first is establishing a shared understanding. So what do we mean when we say safety? And then we'll talk about holistic safety, why it's important to consider safety in all areas of life when we're working with victim survivors. And then we'll get into the nitty-gritty. So what's a safety plan? How do you use it? And finally, we are going to walk through some planning tools and create a holistic safety plan for a fictional survivor. So I am going to give you all a couple more seconds just to answer this poll, asking what your role is in the community. I know you've already answered in the chat, but let's do it on the poll as well. All right, just a moment. And I'm going to end it now. So it looks like we have a pretty good group of domestic violence or sexual assault advocates. Thank you all for being here. And if you're another type of advocate that we do not have represented in the poll, we're also super glad that you're here. I also know we have a good cadre of victim survivors in here as well. Thank you so much for being here and for the work that you are doing as well. All right, shall we move along? So our first part today, we're going to talk about safety, figure out what it means, how we define safety, what safety looks like for the people that we work with, and what are the different types of safety. So I invite you to think about that middle question, what does safety mean for the people you work with? And try to type your answers or your reflections in the chat as we move forward. I would love to hear, because we all have different understandings of safety, right? So I'd love to hear what the people you work with think of safety as. All right, so safety is, at its core, a state of being free from harm or danger. When you're physically safe, it means that nobody's messing with you, that your bodily autonomy is honored, it's adhered to. When you're physically safe, it means that you can move through the world the way you want to. Nobody's blocking you from leaving a room. And yes, it is our right to physical safety, as somebody says in the chat. It's freedom of movement. It is freedom from danger. That's physical safety, right? But when you're emotionally safe, we talk about emotional safety as being a feeling that your thoughts and your experiences are honored, that you don't need to impress people or prove to anybody that you are worthy of safety or love. You just are. It's that certainty of knowing that you are not going to be criticized or blamed or rejected. When you're emotionally safe, you are free to express yourself exactly as you are. You're free to show up how you are in the world without consequences. You're free to share dissatisfaction with somebody. You can tell the person you love, hey, I don't really like the way you went about that just now, or hey, can you maybe fold the towels a different way? You are free and safe to share those dissatisfactions or your excitement, your dreams and goals without being judged. And when we're working with victim survivors, um, we think about safety a lot in terms of survivorship, right? So whether we're working with a victim survivor to plan a safety plan or plan a grocery list, right? We want to avoid recreating the controlling dynamic of an abusive relationship. And we do this by prioritizing self determination, a victim survivor's ability to make their own decisions. We prioritize that over what we might think is the safest choice, right? Because it's not about us. The Northwest Network of bisexual, lesbian, gay, and transgender survivors in Washington State has some really great info about self-determination versus safety. And actually, the Washington State Coalition Against Domestic Violence has enshrined self-determination in policy. It states that all advocates have a duty to prioritize the victim survivor's self-determination above everything else, which is really cool. Because when people make their own decisions, when they have the right to choose what they want to do with their life, where they want to go, how they want to experience safety, that safety naturally results. It is a natural product of a person's ability to choose their own path. Maybe safety doesn't result right away or in the way that advocates would prefer or would expect, but isn't it more important that people find their own way rather than continue to live by another person's recommendations or demands? I say this right at the beginning of this webinar because it is so important to keep survivor self-determination first in our minds and know that as advocates, we are in the passenger seat. And the worst thing that you can do when you're in the passenger seat is reach over and take the wheel. We have to let the people who are driving the car drive the car. We're just going to sit with them, ask them questions, and we're on this road together. What we're not going to do is say, hey, turn left here and take the wheel. No, that would be disastrous. All right. So we've talked about self-determination over safety, but what is safety? We know physically it's the freedom to move through the world without restraint, without threat or intimidation. But emotional safety, it's the freedom to do what exactly? So these things here, the freedom to express yourself fully and authentically, the freedom to change your location, appearance, attitude, beliefs, the freedom to share dissatisfaction about a loved one's actions, or share your personal insecurities and fears, or have a conversation without it automatically being an argument. These are all hallmarks of emotional safety as well as physical. And these are ideas that many people who don't have experience with abusive relationships, a lot of people who don't have that experience take these things for granted because it should be a given, right? That you're able to change your outfit or change your mind or bring up what's bothering you in a relationship. These things should all be expected. This safety should be a right. So people who aren't in abusive relationships or haven't experienced violence tend not to think about these things as necessary because they're a given. But I would encourage you to remember that this is what safety really looks like. So we also know that the opposite of safe is unsafe. And the opposite of safety is unsafety, which is a weird sounding word, but it's the word that we use. Feelings of unsafety, whether they're physical or emotional or something else, those are pervasive in the lives of victim survivors. Physically, obviously, if you're in an abusive relationship, you're exposed to a harmful or risky situation. Your bodily autonomy has been compromised in some way, and Emotional safety, though, can be a little harder to point out than physical safety. It's that state of unease, feeling that something's wrong, or at least something's not quite right. Uh, Emotional unsafety can be the feeling that you aren't being respected or honored for who you are, or the feeling that you might be in danger. So those are general signs of unsafety. But here are some other ones. These are some physical and emotional signs that you might be unsafe or experiencing unsafety. You might stop breathing or start breathing really slowly. You might, let's see, you might feel small or helpless or terrified. You might feel younger than you usually do. Um, these are all signs that you might be unsafe. Um, you might have some physical symptoms too, like tingling or numbness or stomach pains. You might feel suddenly very cold or very warm, and that can clue you into the fact that you are feeling unsafe or need support. But feel free to add others in the chat. What are some physical symptoms that you have experienced when feeling unsafe? How do you know that you need support? Um, I would love to know. Other signs that you might need emotional support or you might be feeling emotionally unsafe are noticing that you're thinking in really concrete extremes, like you might be feeling always and never or black and white thinking. You might be thinking you might lose your ability to see the middle ground in things. Yeah, you might have panic attacks or super hyper vigilant. If you're really hyper vigilant and aware of everything, looking out for a possible threat, that's definitely a sign that you're feeling unsafe. Maybe you're not physically in an unsafe situation, but you feel emotionally unsafe, right? Yeah, you may have trouble focusing. Physically, you might feel like your throat is closing up. Other signs are urgency, like a sense of you need something to be decided right now. You need to know immediately what the plan is going to be. As opposed to when you're feeling safe, you might just say, "Oh yeah, I'll play it by ear. Whatever happens, happens." No, if you are feeling unsafe, you need to know right now. Other signs of unsafety or needing support could be feeling self-destructive or having flashbacks or nightmares. You might also have some indecision. If you're normally a really decisive person and always know, like, you can make a choice pretty easily, when you're emotionally unsafe or physically unsafe, you might have a hard time deciding what to do or figuring out what's next. So thank you for adding in the chat signs that you might need support. I want to share why this is important, because we might think, all right, well, here are the signs, cool, whatever. But it's really important to recognize the signs where the signs that you might be feeling unsafe, or the signs that you need emotional support, because self-knowledge of warning signs is a really important part of any safety plan. You won't know when to deploy your safety plan if you don't know the signs that are telling you you need your safety plan, right? Okay. So, holistic safety. Let's talk about it. Working in the field of domestic violence prevention and survivor advocacy, we spend a lot of time working with victim survivors to make sure their bodies are safe, that they aren't being physically harmed or threatened. We work with them to change or tweak their environment to minimize the risk of physical danger, right? And this is so important. Absolutely, it's important. But if we focus too much on this part, we lose sight of the fact that we're more than meat bags, right? Like, people are more than just our physical bodies. And that's where holistic safety comes in. So holistic means all encompassing. It means treating the whole person rather than strictly the physical body or just the immediate issue. Holistic safety recognizes that we're more than just physical bodies, that we have emotional lives, we have social lives that include other humans. And for better or worse, we live in a society, so we have digital and financial lives too. And we need to figure out what safety means and what safety looks like to us in the context of all of these different facets of our life. All right, so why is holistic safety important? For survivors, I mean, sometimes when we're working with the victim survivor or supporting one as a friend, we spend our energy, we expend all of our time and energy helping the victim survivor achieve physical safety, right? We write restraining orders, we find safe shelter, we walk through escape routes and police reporting, we do all of that. But abuse creates more than physical scars. It is an emotional experience. It's a chronic and complex trauma. And we need to figure out how to support survivors in accessing emotional safety as well as physical safety, because they need that too. And for those of us who are advocates or even survivor advocates, emotional safety is hugely important. We need to think about our own holistic safety too, because survivor advocates and advocates who aren't survivors, we hear a lot of difficult stories, right? We are constantly holding information that is really difficult to hold. And keeping all of that information requires a lot of emotional strength, and it also can result in vicarious trauma. So we need to figure out how to handle that. It's not dealing with our vicarious trauma and dealing with the difficulties that we experience in our job as advocates. Those things aren't easily addressed by physical safety. That's where emotional safety and other forms of holistic safety come in for advocates. If you, as a survivor advocate, have information on how to access holistic safety for yourself, or what holistic safety means to you in the context of your job as an advocate, I know we have a lot of them here, please feel free to put it in the chat. All right, let me check the interpreters, see if we all are spotlit. Yes, we are. Great. Okay, so how do we attend to safety in the areas that we need to, right? It's different for everybody because different things make different people feel safe. The routes of safety that I have on the slide right now, these are a good way to conceptualize safety for people. The routes of safety was created by a social worker named Jake Ernst as a way to categorize the kinds of activities or thought processes that people use to achieve feelings of safety during or after a crisis. Has anybody, we don't have a poll for this, but in the chat, have you heard of routes of safety before? We've mentioned it in a couple of webinars, but I would love to know, like, are you familiar with this concept of routes of safety outside of women's advocates? Getting a lot of no's. Okay, well, this is a really fun time to talk about this then. I at first had a hard time figuring out, like, what do routes of safety mean? What are they about? But Brennison, who is also often running these webinars, she likens them to love languages, but for safety. You know how everybody has different ways that they feel and express and receive love, and we call those love languages. Routes of safety are the ways that we feel and receive and express safety. And that analogy was really helpful for me as a way to conceptualize routes of safety. So the routes themselves are common humanity, inner guidance, structure and certainty, sensory experiences, quality relationships, protective measures, closeness and proximity, and private retreat. So those are all of the routes, but what do those words mean, right? We are going to figure it out. So for folks who have private retreat as a route of safety, they might really value their alone time. If they're feeling elevated or unsafe, their first response might be to go put themselves in the bathroom and just like sit alone for a couple of minutes until they can put themselves together or feel safe again. It looks like escaping into a good book or music to kind of tune out the rest of the world and tune back in with yourself. These folks who are private retreat oriented might think, I feel so much better by myself. I feel safest by myself. I love getting lost in thought. They might also think, I'm elevated right now. If you ask them a question when they're upset, they might say, let me think about it for a little bit. I'll get back to you. For people who have common humanity as a route of safety, they really rely on those human connections and that shared experience of being a person in the world to feel safe. When they have a difficult time or when they're feeling unsafe or endangered, it can be really helpful for these folks to remember that they're not the only person who has gone through what they're going through. That difficulty is a part of life, and it's something that everybody goes through and they will get through themselves. Common humanity people find great strength in the idea that they are not alone in their struggles. And they might also really enjoy the relief of being in a group of people they love and sharing a joke. Inner guidance is another route of safety that is similar to private retreat, but it is for people who have inner guidance as a route of safety. They might really value their own inner wisdom as a way to access safety and relief. These folks might process through writing or journaling. They might not talk to other people about their struggles. They might not talk to other people when they're having a hard time, but their journal is full. Their journal is absolutely full of them working a problem out for themselves. These folks love to say that they know how to take care of themselves. If they're having a hard time, they don't have to ask anybody else what to do. They know. They look inside themselves and say, all right, here's what I know how to do for this situation. And then they make it happen. There are other folks, if you are a huge list maker, or if your Outlook calendar is just full to the minute, you might be a structure and certainty person. These are people for whom unstructured or uncertain time can be really overwhelming. And structure and certainty folks might, in times of stress and in times of crisis, they may take great comfort in writing a list of everything they need to do to get over the struggle. They might keep themselves busy to distract from the emotional difficulties that they're experiencing. They might follow a schedule. Yeah, Brenison says, when navigating unpredictable situations, that structure and certainty can provide stability and predictability. These are folks for whom they feel better knowing what to expect next. Let's see. There's also a couple more. If you have ever retreated into your room with a scented candle and a nice blanket and some music to feel safe again, you might be a sensory experiences person. These folks often commonly experience safety by getting out of the house and going for a walk, if that's possible for them. Just really surrounding yourself with those wonderful, comforting sensory experiences can be a way to access safety. And then there's quality relationships. People who really access safety and access stability by being with others, being in community with other people. These are folks for whom they know they can't access safety by themselves. We talked about the inner guidance people, the people for whom routes of inner guidance is their route of safety. Those folks know within themselves what they need to do. But quality relationships people will say, I'm feeling unsafe. I have a list of friends that I can call, and I know that I will feel better or feel safer by calling them. They really thrive on those connections to the people they love. There are also protective measures as a route of safety. If you are really into your boundaries, to standing up for yourself and saying no if you're in a crisis, protective measures might be your route of safety. And then there's also closeness and proximity, and that's where maybe being alone is scary, or if you are feeling unsafe, you don't want to be alone. Closeness and proximity is that ability to be near others, share physical touch, the comfort in just saying like, hey, can I have a hug? That is another way that people access routes of safety. So, and Brennison shared the information on different routes for you to self-identify with as you see fit. And we found at Women's Advocates, we found that routes of safety are a really useful tool for discussion and safety planning when we're working with victim survivors, because domestic violence is a form of complex trauma. And we know that experiencing trauma of any kind can make a person feel less safe in the world. I am going to launch a poll to see what routes of safety are resonating the most with you all, and you can select multiple. But yeah, we spend a lot of time on routes of safety in our work with victim survivors, because these routes go along with the best practices of trauma-informed care. That idea that survivors of trauma do better and they heal when they're presented with choices. So when they get to choose, for example, how to experience or access safety in a particular situation. The routes of safety can also be really helpful for thinking about safety in a more creative way outside of just strictly physical safety planning, because there are some folks for whom physical safety is not always accessible, or it's completely inaccessible if there are folks who are still in abusive relationships. Or for folks who have to maintain contact with their abuser for any reason. But the routes of safety are really great for these survivors because they offer hope that even if they can't access physical safety, there are other ways for them to feel safe. So let's see, looking at the poll results, we have a lot of private retreat lovers here. Okay. So it all looks pretty even, but we have private retreat on top with structure and certainty and quality relationships tied for second. Interesting. Well, thank you all for sharing that. I'm glad we had this time to just share some information about routes of safety. So let's talk about what safety planning is. Simply put, it's a plan for your safety, but really it's a playbook for survival. Preparing ahead of time for what you'll bring, who you'll call, where you go, in the event that you leave an abusive relationship, or if you're in an abusive relationship and an incident happens, or for afterwards when you're healing from the lingering effects of abuse. A safety plan is an organized and useful toolkit of supplies and resource lists of phone numbers and other stuff you need to stay safe while you're going through abuse, while you're leaving a relationship or while you're healing. And we talk about preparation because it's essential. When you are in crisis, your brain forgets everything. Your brain forgets all of those important things that you thought you would remember forever. Your brain forgets important phone numbers. It forgets internal maps. Your crisis brain is forgetful. So it's really important to give your crisis brain a break by putting a safety plan together ahead of time. Let's see, I'll talk about that a little more, but I also would like to know, have you ever completed a safety plan before? Let me know. But back to preparation, it's really essential because when you're planning to leave, especially, having a list of where you'll go, what to bring with you, all of that stuff, it keeps you from running outside barefoot in the middle of the night. Which is really common for survivors who don't have a safety plan to just leave without anything. And sometimes you have to do that. Absolutely. Sometimes you do just have to leave. But if you don't bring anything with you, or if you don't know what to bring or where to go, you might end up needing to return back to the house. You might have forgotten your shoes or your birth certificate and need to go back. So planning ahead of time is really important to eliminate that risk of needing to return to perhaps a dangerous situation. It also, planning ahead, having a safety plan keeps you from just driving around aimlessly in the middle of the night trying to think of a safe place to go, which is also very common. So looks like most folks have completed a safety plan before. If you have not, don't worry. We are going to talk all about it. All right. So what is in a safety plan? We have 4 major components of a safety plan: knowledge, basic needs, lifelines, and strategies. So like I said earlier, knowledge of warning signs is crucial. You need to know, for a physical safety plan, you need to know what warning signs clue you into the fact that an abusive incident is about to happen. What patterns do you notice in your relationship or in your mental life? The knowledge piece is about having that self-understanding of what it looks like for you or in your relationship when something goes wrong, or when there's a conflict, or when something violent is about to happen. And then basic needs, these are the physical things that you put in what we like to call a go bag. These are your foods, your medications, knowing where you're going to go if you leave, having money to take with you when you go. And then lifelines, when you need to leave or when you're having a crisis, whether it is abuse related or emotional or both, you need to know who to call. Because like I said, your crisis brain is not going to remember your therapist's phone number. Your crisis brain can barely remember 911. So you need to write all that stuff down, right? You have your list of domestic violence hotlines or mental health hotlines. You have your emergency contact, either the person who gets all your medical information or the person you trust most in this world. You have a list of shelter numbers. You have a list of therapists or counselors that you can call on. And then the numbers of your trusted friends or family. It's really helpful to have these numbers written down and put in your safety plan because you may need to leave your phone. For folks who are experiencing location tracking or stalking, it might be important if they leave a relationship or are in crisis to not have their phone on them for those purposes. So having a written list of those phone numbers is really important. And then strategies. So for folks who are in an abusive relationship, maybe the strategies section includes routes out of the home. This is the way that I will go through the house if I need to leave, or this is an exit that I can take that I know will be open and not locked. It could include a list of grounding techniques or emotional regulation techniques for emotional crises. If you are experiencing an emotional crisis, your safety plan could say, all right, here are the breathing techniques that I'm going to use in this moment. So those are the major components of a safety plan. And we're going to take a tour of our personalized safety planning worksheet. I am going to stop sharing this screen and share another one. This is our personalized safety plan from Women's Advocates. It is available on our website and at tinyurl.com/WA safety plan. I will put that link in the chat in just a moment. But our safety plan starts with an affirmation that abuse is not your fault. You deserve safety and respect and support in your relationship. But the very first step is the assessment. That's the knowledge piece. What are the behaviors or actions that the abusive person has taken to harm or scare or control you? You can check if you're working with a survivor, you can ask them about all of these different things and you can check the boxes. And then after you have done the assessment, you go back and say, okay, well, if you checked the controls money box, how are we going to respond? Like, let's figure out together how you want to respond when this person is controlling your money. Or what do you want to do if this person is threatening you or isolating you? You can't plan for what you don't know to expect. So that's our assessment piece. And then we talk warning signs. So what are the warning signs that this person is going to threaten you? Or what kind of things tip you off to the fact that an incident might happen or this person might be about to harm or scare you? We do have some examples here because it can be really hard to just come up with these right away. So for example, if you have a partner that gets really loud and threatening when they're drunk, a warning sign might be that this person goes out to the bar for the night. So what you do is, if you have kids, you send them somewhere else so they don't wake up and get scared when this person comes home. A warning sign might also be that the person starts muttering cuss words under their breath. And so if you hear that, or you notice that is happening, you try to leave the house. So that's the section for you to work with the survivor to put together warning signs and what you'll do if those warning signs come up. And then step 3, we talked about our Lifelines list. This is where we put them down. So we've got all of the 24/7 hotlines in Minnesota available on this one. Obviously not all of you are in Minnesota, so you might wanna tweak this or put together different, more relevant phone numbers. But we also have a section of emergency contacts that the survivor can fill in. So if I feel confused, depressed, or scared, these are the names and phone numbers of people who I know will have my back if I call them. Who are the people that this person, that can pick this person up, no questions asked, or take them somewhere safe? What are their names and phone numbers? And then just to mitigate the risk of leaving with nowhere to go, we have a section where we ask survivors, where are 4 safe places that you can go in an emergency? That gives you options. 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 different places that you have available to you, and you can choose where you want to go. Write it down ahead of time, because again, your crisis brain is not going to remember. If you're in a crisis, your brain is not going to say, okay, these are the 4 places that I remembered that I can go to. This place is closed right now, I can go to. No, your brain's not going to remember that. You need to have a list so you can say, yeah, this, I remember this now. This place is open. I can go here, or I can go to my aunt's house. You want to have that all written ahead of time. And then again, here is a lot of us, if you've done safety plans before, like a lot of us have, we know about the go bag. So the little pack, the little backpack full of medications, vital documents, all of the stuff that when you gotta go, you need to take with you. This bag doesn't have to be on the survivor's person at all times. If somebody is planning for a long time to leave, they might already have this bag full of their medications, their birth certificates, their cell phone or keys. They might have this bag stored at a friend's house so that they can leave with nothing and then pick it up somewhere else. A lot of times the risk of putting together a go bag and keeping it in your house is that the abusive person will find it and ask, what is this? And then your safety is compromised. So we have an option here in the safety plan to write the name of the person who you've asked to hold on to the bag. And then we've got some safety tips that help folks. They might, obviously, everybody's different. So some of these tips might not be useful or applicable to a survivor's situation. We offer choices. What works for you, you keep, and what doesn't work for you, you just ignore. So there are options for people who need a safety plan. To stay physically safe in their home, they might ask their landlord to change the locks or install a security system. These are some things that might work and might not be applicable to others. There are neighborhood tips. If you're in an abusive relationship, you can talk to your neighbors and develop a code word like we're talking about in the chat for when to call 911 or when something is happening in the house. We have tips here for how to stay safe at work, how to stay safe at daycare or school if there are children involved. It's really useful to go through these, and just as a starting point to say, if you're working with the survivor, hey, do you work? If you work, is there somebody else that you can tell about this situation? Is there somebody else that you can ask to call 911 or call security if you see this person? And these are all just jumping off points. So maybe they don't have a job, but they volunteer somewhere all the time. And so they can maybe say, you know what, I can tell my volunteer supervisor that I'm having this problem and they can do this. It's customizable. It is for you. It's for the survivor. So make sure that you're tailoring the safety plan to their needs. Other examples of changing routes to work, changing passwords, teaching kids to call 911. And then finally, we end on the emotional safety plan. So a list of, because like I said, crisis brain doesn't remember that you like to do meditation or deep breathing. No, crisis brain just knows you're in crisis and that is it. So this is a chance for victim survivors to make a list of techniques that make them feel grounded and safe if they're scared or stressed. And then also we end with a list of things that survivors can tell themselves when they're feeling down or feeling small. This is just a space for them to write down affirmations that lift them up, ground them, and give them that sort of inner strength to continue with the rest of the plan or to get through the crisis. That is our safety plan tour. Thank you for hanging in there with me through it. Let's get back to the presentation. All right, so Every good physical safety plan also includes an emotional safety plan and vice versa. We talked about it as the last page of our safety plan. I think of emotional safety plans like a toolbox rather than a list. It can be a physical box full of the stuff that makes you feel safe, that's labeled in case of emergency. I always picture like a weighted blanket encased in one of those fire extinguisher boxes that says in case of crisis, break glass. But that's just me. So the elements of an emotional safety plan: to feel emotionally safe, you need to know that your basic needs are covered. You need to know that you know where your meds are, you're in a safe environment, you have food and water. To be emotionally safe, you also need to have self-knowledge of what makes you feel good and of what signs clue you into the fact that you might not be doing so well. You also need those physical comfort items like blankets or pillows or fluffy stuffed animals or a cat who will come up and let you pet it. You also want to make sure that your emotional safety kit has a list of those grounding techniques that can help you de-escalate, as well as a list of lifelines and phone numbers, so the people who are safe and supportive to talk to, and when you'll need to talk to them. So make it easier on yourself in a crisis by having all of these things put together ahead of time. We love preparation, structure, and certainty. So whether you're making a safety plan for yourself or for a client, this bulleted list is a really good assessment tool for figuring out whether the safety plan you've created is useful. Is it individualized? Does it address the specific needs of this specific person? Is it realistic? Can we actually use it? Does it work? Is it up to date? Are we frequently revisiting it? Are we revising it when things change? Or is this the same safety plan that we've been working with for the past 3 years and it's not even relevant anymore? I'm going to put the safety plan link in the chat again. But is it also confidential? Does the abusive person know about it? Because if that's the case, we got to put together a new safety plan. And then finally, has it been shared with just one other trusted person? Again, not the abusive person, but has it been shared with an advocate? Has it been shared with an emergency contact? Those are the things that you can ask yourself when you're working on a safety plan, whether it's for yourself or for somebody you work with. And now we're going to put one together. So how do you assess somebody's safety? What questions do you ask the person? And what questions do you ask yourself while you're walking with them? We are going to create a fictional safety plan for Tasha. So this is Tasha. She's not real. I made her up. Tasha is 32 years old and she has one child, age 3. She is working full-time at a grocery store while she waits for an apprenticeship slot to open at her favorite tattoo shop. Tasha's primary support system is her aunt and her very small but very tight-knit group of best friends. She has a lot of strengths. She has a very strong sense of self. She's very creative and artistic, and she likes to think she is a natural leader. So in terms of experience of abuse and why we're making Tasha a safety plan, Tasha has been in and out of an abusive relationship with Robert, her child's father, for 5 years. They live together. In the past, Robert has been physically and sexually abusive, but lately that's been less prevalent and he's been more emotionally abusive than anything else. Tasha has left him twice since their child was born, but each time returned after a few weeks. When she does, though, she has returned both times with new ways to keep herself and her child safe. We love her for her resilience. She knows the relationship is abusive and has worked really hard for the past 2 years to create some emotional distance between Robert and herself. And now that she has a stable job and a strong support system, Tasha wants to leave Robert for good. So we are going to work with Tasha in mind to develop a safety plan using the Women's Advocate Safety Plan template. So please put in the chat if you have thoughts and questions as you're working with Tasha. So this is how we assess safety. In that first assessment portion, we might be asking her about those specific behaviors that Robert uses to make her feel small or to abuse her. But we also want to work with this tool as well, this assessment of safety in various areas. There are some things that we know about Tasha up front that we can easily answer. Like, we know she's not isolated because she's going into work. She talks with her aunt and her friends. She's not isolated in the traditional sense. But there are some things that we don't know from just looking at her story, right? We don't really know about physical safety. There's not so much physical abuse anymore, but that could change. So what questions do we want to ask Tasha about her physical safety as she plans to leave? We know we want to ask her whether there are weapons in the home or which rooms have a way out, but put in the chat, what else do we want to know? Ooh, somebody says, what did it look like the last time you left? Yeah, figuring out what she did to leave those first 2 times and what happened. Absolutely, we want to know that. Yeah, financial safety, we want to know, is your money safe? Are your accounts locked down in private? Absolutely. We also want to know, I think, about emotional abuse and the emotional support that she might be needing. We know that the verbal and emotional abuse is still going on. So maybe we can ask, well, what does Robert say to you? What does he tell you when he's being emotionally abusive? And then we can workshop how she can respond in her own brain to those things. Yes, wanting to know about any history of stalking so that we can plan for that this time. We want to know about cyber safety and what emotional support systems she has. Ooh, yes, asking her, where did she go in the past? And does Robert know where she went when she left him? Asking whether she could take her child with her last time and whether the child's daycare or school knows about the situation. Yes, I love all of these questions. We also want to know about self-talk. We know from my little profile that Tasha has a strong sense of self, but we can always reinforce that more with affirmations and a good support system. We know she's kind of distancing herself from Robert, so she's probably able to separate what he is saying that's abusive from what she actually knows and feels about herself. But it's always important to reinforce that she is strong, she is important, she is worthy. We can always reinforce that with affirmations and a good support system. We also know that she's got a pretty good support system. So maybe we'll ask about the aunt and these best friends. What can they do for you? What were they able to do last time when you left? Were they able to hold your go bag or hide your stuff? And then this mover scale at the bottom we will send that to you. That's included as a resource at the end of these slides. It's the measure of victim empowerment related to safety scale. So it's a self-assessment that a victim survivor fills out on their own about the beliefs that they have about themselves, the strategies that they have available to them to resist emotional abuse, that kind of thing. So you can use that as well as a planning and assessment tool. But yes, we also want to ask Tasha about her experience with police and family court at this point, because depending on what that experience is, if police or child protection was involved, that might impact her ability to leave or take the child with her. Absolutely. So in Tasha's safety plan, maybe when we go through the assessment and we ask her about all of these different behaviors, maybe Robert has pulled her hair before cheated on her, called her names. Maybe he's hit her in the past, even though he doesn't do that anymore. We want to know that it has happened, because abuse escalates when people try to leave. We find out that Robert's told her what to do and where to go. We find out that he's threatened suicide if she's left. So we definitely want to figure out how to plan for how to help her emotionally in that situation, because a lot of victim survivors do feel responsible for any feelings of shame or sadness or any suicidality that their abusive person might be feeling or saying that they feel. But we also want to make sure that Tasha knows that threatening suicide is an abuse tactic used very often. We find out other things about what Robert has done, what Tasha has experienced in this relationship, and we can ask her about all of these things. We ask her about warning signs. So what clues her in to finding out or to realizing that an abusive incident might happen, or that Robert's about to start a fight or start getting in his feelings or being emotionally abusive to her. We want to find that out. And then we ask her about emergency contacts. So who is she going to call? If she feels confused or depressed or scared, we ask her who's got her back. And we find out that her best friends, Bree and Tiara, are going to be the people that she puts on this list. We also find out that in an emergency, her Aunt Rhonda is ready to pick her up whenever, no questions asked, right away. So we put her on the list. And then it turns out that Aunt Rhonda's house and Bree's apartment are safe places that she can go. We work with her to find additional places as well. All right, and this is when we get the go bag. And like somebody says in the chat, we want to make sure she has all the documents needed to leave for herself and her child. It's really important to get child social security cards and birth certificates away too. What does Tasha need to keep with her, to bring with her, to make sure she doesn't have to go back? We find out she needs her documents, a change of clothes, she needs money, she needs her keys, and her kid needs a medication, some vital documents, maybe a stuffed animal or a blankie. And when we ask her, okay, well, Tasha, who's going to hold on to this stuff for you? We find out that Tiara will. Love it. Then we'll run through safety tips with her, figure out what she can do in her neighborhood. Turns out that she's leaving him. She doesn't want to stay in the apartment. So this stuff for in the home, we're going to ignore that. But in the neighborhood, maybe she tells her kids' daycare that Robert's not allowed to pick up her kid. Maybe at work, she tells her manager who to call or what to do if something goes wrong. She asks her coworkers at the grocery store, hey, if you see him or if anybody asks where I am or what my schedule is, don't tell them. And then we make a list of where does Robert work? Where does Robert hang out? What places does he frequent? So that Tasha can have that as a list of places to avoid. We workshop her route to and from work. Maybe she takes the bus and she's going to switch buses. She's going to go earlier or later, or she's going to take the 70 instead of the 74. It takes a little longer, but it goes in a different way. We talk to Tasha about digital safety, figuring out whether she's got location tracking on her phone, because as somebody said earlier, stalking is a possibility. So we want to mitigate the risk of that whenever possible as well. Maybe her kid's a little too young to learn how to call 911, so we don't mess with that yet. But then we work on emotional safety. So Tasha has decided that listening to music and hugging her kid are really helpful grounding techniques for her. as well as drawing or sketching because she's very creative. And maybe joking with her friends is really grounding and helpful for her as well. And then we give Tasha the chance to write a list of things that she can tell herself when she's having a hard time, when she's feeling small, when she's maybe feeling unsure about the choices that she's making. And we give her the space to write those out for herself. All right. Thank you all for your attention to Tasha. We are done with that part of the safety plan. I want to give some special consideration to a couple of things. Like I said, safety plans are different for different people, and some survivors are different from others, obviously. There are some who need to stay in contact with the abusive person for whatever reason. So if Tasha's goal had been to stay in her relationship with Robert, her safety plan would have looked way different. We wouldn't have focused so much on where's she going to go, on putting together a bag, on who she'll stay with, because stuff like moving out or protective orders or going into a shelter, those aren't as relevant for survivors who want to stay or need to stay in contact. Maybe instead we would have focused on what are some de-escalation techniques? How do you know when an abusive incident is going to happen? And what can you do on your end to mitigate that? Maybe we would be planning for custody exchange strategies of, okay, this is the visitation site we're going to use. This is how we're going to do the exchange. This is the person who's going to help us do that. Maybe we would be planning about the exchange process instead. When we're planning with survivors in contact, we also need to address the partner who's using abuse in a lot of cases. A lot of times victim survivors don't want to leave. They just want the abuse to stop. So, but they can't do that themselves, right? Only the person who's using the abusive behavior can stop the abuse. So we need to figure out, how is this survivor going to, I mean, it's not a survivor's job to get the abusive person to stop abusing. That's the abuser's job, right? But we need to figure out, how are we going to offer the information about and the resources about intervention programs or counseling? How are we going to offer that information in a way that makes it known, hey, your behavior is the problem here and you need to stop. And here are, if you're serious about stopping, here are places that you can go to learn how to do that. We need to figure out how the survivor can do that in a safe way, so that we're not saying, all right, just tell this person to go to an intervention program, and then it starts a fight, or the abusive person gets upset or escalates. And good safety planning is survivor defined. So we, as advocates with survivors in contact with an abusive person, we might have a very specific vision of what safety and success looks like for this person. And as advocates, that vision might be, all right, it's a successful safety plan if we have gotten her or if we've gotten them to leave this person. But that's our vision of success as the advocate, right? What does success look like for the survivor? Maybe it's not leave and get out of here. Maybe a successful safety plan is, I know how to get away from the house during an abusive incident. I know what to do to stay away. I know how to keep myself out of immediate physical danger. Or maybe it's, after an abusive incident, I just want the number of abusive incidents to decrease. I don't want to leave. I just want the abuse to get less. I want there to be less of it. I want it to stop entirely. We all have different visions of safety and success. And it's really, really, really important when we're working with survivors in contact to constantly be checking in with them about the safety plan. Again, a good safety plan is constantly updated. It's open to revision. The situation changes really, really often. Um, so check in with the survivors in contact. Is the safety plan working the way that it was intended to? Are things getting better or worse? Are they the same? Yes, somebody says in the chat, we have to do new safety plans as the situation changes. Once they've left, the safety plan changes. If they have a protective order, it changes. If they choose to drop the protective order, it changes. And you can write a whole new safety plan, or you can go back to the old one as a foundation and say, okay, some of this is still relevant, but let's cross this part out and add something in that better reflects your situation. It can be sort of a living document. It should be a living document. So yeah, survivors in contact can be really, it's really complicated to safety plan for them, because we have to set, as advocates, we have to set our own feelings of success aside. We do in this field, we have this goal of, we got to get them out. We got to get the survivor out. We got to get them into safety. And for us, safety looks like going into a shelter, getting away from this person, never looking back. But what we have to remember, as hard as it is, as difficult as it is emotionally to deal with, we have to remember that it's not our choice. It's not our call. When we tell somebody, okay, the only way to keep you safe is to leave, what we're saying is, unless you leave, we're not going to help you be safe. And that's not the impression we want to be putting out into the world. And it's really hard to watch somebody go through a safety plan and then leave and then go back to the abusive relationship. And that can be frustrating and scary for us as advocates. But again, it's not about us. And also, leaving and going back and leaving and going back is common. It's normal. It happens all the time. There are very few survivors who leave once and stay away. Like that is just wildly uncommon. The statistic is that it takes the average victim survivor like 8 times to leave an abusive relationship forever. Yes, we have to be survivor centered. And that's really hard. And that's where our own self-care comes in, right? So as advocates, we need to have our own holistic safety plan for, well, if the survivor I'm working with does something that I wouldn't have wanted them to do, how am I gonna deal with that? What am I gonna do to take care of my own feelings, to pour back into my cup if I'm feeling depleted by this situation? So that's planning with survivors in contact, and what you need to do with them and with everybody that you're working with. Remember that safety means freedom of choice. So self-determination, that comes first. What we don't want to do is take the steering wheel. Remember, we want to make sure that the survivors we're working with are the ones who are in charge. All we're doing is asking the questions. How do you want to work with this? What are you going to do if this happens? Who is the best person for you to call in this moment? What would be helpful for you to do if this thing were to happen? We are asking the questions. The survivor's giving us the answers, and we're writing those answers in the safety plan word for word. We're not saying, oh no, actually, I don't think that's what you should do, that's what you would do. You should do this thing instead. No, we're not doing that. We're focusing on self-determination here. And so it's important to remember that when we're planning with survivors, maybe leaving is unrealistic. Maybe this person can't leave or doesn't want to, or it's just not in the cards for them right now. Same thing with getting the abuse to stop. Maybe the survivor we're working with knows that leaving or getting the abuse to stop entirely isn't going to happen, but what they want from you as their advocate is assistance figuring out how to avoid the worst of it, how to avoid the worst of the abuse. And as an advocate, you do your job. You work for the victim survivor. If the victim survivor tells you, hey, I don't want to leave, I know this isn't going to stop. What I want is to make sure that I am safe from the most severe abuse. You don't say, actually, what you want to do is leave. No, you don't, because that's not what you're being asked to do. That's not what the survivor needs your assistance with. What we want to do is center their desired outcome, asking right away at the beginning of every safety plan, if you got your way, if everything worked out the way that you wanted it to in this situation, what would that look like? And then honoring their answer. We're sticking to their measure of success, knowing that it might look different from our own, but that what our measure of success isn't important. It's not about us. And with that being said, we have to keep our judgments in check. If we think that a survivor would be better off leaving, or would be better off in some sort of contact or in a different situation, we don't judge them for not doing that, right? We never judge a survivor for not sticking to our measure of success, because who are we? we're just some guy. I mean, as advocates, we are important. We're an important part of this healing journey and this safety journey, but we need to really check our judgments and our biases, because we're not the center of this universe. The victim survivor is. So how do we promote safety? How do we help the victim survivors that we're working with feel comfortable with the plans that they've made and in control of their own lives? At a shelter, like Women's Advocates, that might sound like, you are welcome here. We want you to feel safe here. And if something doesn't feel right, let us know. Please go ahead and contribute in the chat. Like, what are things that you say or could imagine yourself saying to victim survivors to promote safety? We might say things like, what you've been through is really frightening, and it makes sense that you're scared. Our building, the place that you're in right now, it's always locked. Our location's confidential, but if there's anything else that would make you feel safer, please let us know. Or if there's anything else that we could do for you to make you feel better or to make you feel more comfortable here, please tell us. What else can we say? How else do you promote safety with victim survivors in your own work? I know we have a lot of domestic violence advocates on the webinar right now, so I would love to know, what are you saying to survivors that you work with? Just wait for the chat. Yeah, trusting your instincts, telling a survivor, how are you feeling? Asking a survivor, how are you feeling? What is your gut telling you? And to let them go with that. Yes, reminding them that they're not alone, and there are resources that we can provide for them if they want it. We're not forcing them into a specific program or resource. We're asking, would you like information on this? Yes, letting them have the time and space to say what they need to say. Just listening, not to offer solutions or not to make plans, but just listening. Yes, telling them, I trust them to make the best choices. I trust you to make the best choices for yourself and for your children. Yeah, making sure they're aware that this isn't the end of the road for our work together. We're here as much or as little as they need. All they have to do is ask. Yes, you're the expert here is a really wonderful thing to say to promote safety. Saying you have options. You deserve to feel safe, however your situation evolves. You are the expert in your own life. If you're feeling unsafe, please let us know. Yes, and being clear about where to send, especially if you're in a shelter setting, being clear about who to communicate their needs to. If you're having a question about food, or if you have a question about the rules, or if there's something you don't like, this is the person that you can tell, or this is the place that you can go to say your piece about that. Clear pathways for communication are really important and promote safety. Yes, asking survivors, what does safety look like to you? What do you need out of your safety plan? Yes, that's like asking, what is your best possible outcome? And then being transparent with your services. Yes. So that nobody is feeling lied to or given the runaround by what you're offering or versus what you say you offer. Absolutely. Yes, all of these are great things to say to promote safety. And here's a list of safety plans. If the Women's Advocates plan isn't your style, there are tons of other safety plans out here. Here are just a few of them. Try them out. Go with what feels good. Ignore the rest. We'll send a follow-up email with a link to these slides, and so you'll have access to all of these links. Our Women's Advocates worksheet here, a link to the National Domestic Violence Hotlines plan, which you can fill out online, and it pre-populates all of the stuff that you filled out. It's super slick. Love is Respect's personal safety plan, which is geared more towards folks 24 and younger. And then a self-care plan template if you would like to do more emotional safety focused work. So all of those are available to you. All of those are available to the survivors you're working with. Just go with what feels good. Ignore the rest. Well, go with what feels good for the survivor you're working with and ignore the rest, because it's not about us. It's not about us. And again, here's the information that you can use. There's a really great pamphlet here called Advocacy Beyond Leaving that is all about working with survivors in contact. I use it all the time. It is just a great refresher for like checking your internal biases and checking your judgments before you're working with survivors. We have a link to the movers scale, more links to routes of safety, the Self-Determination Before Safety pamphlet from the Northwest Network, and some information about seeking safety from intimate partner violence, about victim survivors' experiences in and out of domestic violence shelters. Someone asked, are there some resources that are better for survivors after they've left? The National Domestic Violence Hotlines safety plan is more customizable, I think, than any other plan I've ever seen out there. So that might be more useful for survivors after they've left. Women's Advocates also has a click-through feature on our website that is more customizable, less so than the national hotline, but it does have a section where you can state whether you are in the relationship or thinking about leaving or have left, and it will spit out some resources accordingly. So you can fool around on our website to find that information. Thank you all so much for being here this morning. In Minnesota, at least. We're so happy you are here. If you want to download a PDF of the slides right now and not wait for the recording or the email, you can do so now. Otherwise, I'm going to stop recording and we can use this time to take some questions.